on record. All righty. So any questions from last week? I know the Fortenbaugh weren't able to attend. Meg did post the recording on the website. So Meg indicated that you click anything that has the creed, and I think that's under events. Is that correct, Meg?
It's on the, yeah, if you scroll down to the bottom of the home page or you go to the events page, those are the two places where the class is listed, and you'll see it looks like a little underline under Nicene Creed class. If you click on that underline phrase, it will take you to the YouTube channel where all our videos are.
Okay.
Okay. So Lois is coming in. So last week was really background, setting the social, theological, cultural environment at the time that the creed was adopted. And today we're going to begin digging into the creed itself. And the class is structured in a way you may have intuited from reading through the outline that we're going to be dealing with section by section. So we'll deal with God the Father. Next week we'll deal with Christ as the second part of the Trinity. Next week we will be dealing with Christ in the incarnation, and then the Holy Spirit, and finally with the church as an organ, as a body, the body of Christ. So again, if you have questions, feel free, and we will forge ahead. So today we're going to start with the first segment or section of the creed. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. And we, of course, begin with, we believe in one God. This is an affirmation of the church's monotheism.
That's fine.
That we believe in a single God. It is also a, well, I won't go there yet. This comes from Judaism, from the Shema, which is in Hebrew, Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Or as you are more commonly going to hear it, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, which means, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, or Yahweh, is God. Yahweh is one. Now I'm going to dig a little bit into the details of that, because it can be very useful information. You will see in Judaism it is considered a profanation to speak the name of God. They will not say the name of God. And God names himself in Exodus when Moses says, "Who shall I say sent me?" And the response is, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I am that I am, or I will be what I will be. Tell them, I am, Yahweh sent me, or sent you. Very enigmatic, but you will find that name indicated throughout the Old Testament. It's called the Tetragrammaton because it's 4 letters, YHWH, which has come to be pronounced in the 20th century as Yahweh. Hebrew has no vowels, as most Semitic languages do not. There are no written vowels. They have pointing that says these are the received way that these texts are to be pronounced, that these words are to be pronounced. And it has come to be understood that Yahweh is the name of God. You will see in Judaism that they don't even use name God anymore. You will see G-D. So they've gone even further with that. God, of course, is a term. It's simply a noun. It is not a proper noun. What they have done in the Hebrew Bible, and you would see it in the English translations, is they have substituted for the name of God, the tetragrammaton, Adonai, which is the Hebrew word for Lord. Okay? So if you see Lord, and for instance, you'll see this frequently in the Psalms, when we read the Psalms, you see Lord spelled all in capital letters. That actually is a substitution for the name of God, Yahweh. Okay, does that make sense, or did I lose you in the dust?
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yes, Jeremy. And of course, we, like you just said, we see in the Old Testament the word Lord used pretty much throughout, I think, the Old Testament.
Yes. Yes, and I won't get into Old Testament because that's an entirely different course. But
Yeah.
yes, but you will see there. Therefore, you will see interesting things. References. The Lord said to my Lord. It's Yahweh said to my Lord. Yahweh said to Adonai. So that's the we believe in one God comes from the Shema, which to this day is essentially the creed of Judaism. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And Eloheinu, I didn't translate that for you, is our God. The author of our text indicates it's your God, it is our God, rather than your God. Okay, any questions on that?
Is any of this distinction relevant to our own view of the Trinity, considering that was a point of discussion, I'll call it,
Yes.
back in the early church?
Most definitely. Although the Hebrew issue was not so much an issue with those controversies that were going on in the early church. They kind of moved beyond that. Although there were some of the teachers of heretical teachings that hearkened back to Hebrew scriptures.
Thank you.
And so Marcion, for instance, we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. Marcion viewed that there were two gods, and this really speaks to this statement: we believe in one God. That is directed at, among others, Gnosticism, which taught a duality, against the Manichaean heresy, which also taught dualism. There were a number of dualistic religions at the time, and Marcion's teaching was one of them. He taught that the God of the Old Testament was the God of the world, the God of the material, and the God, therefore, of evil, and that the God of Jesus is the God of light and good. Okay.
Wow.
All righty. So what we're affirming when we make that statement, we believe in one God, is that God exists, that God is in the world, and we go on to say that he is the Father Almighty. Now, there's a good deal to be said about Father, and the author gets into that, the issues of gender-based language, and he makes a fairly decent discussion about that. If you recall that section, do you recall reading that, or should we go over that again? I'm getting no response.
I think you should go over it.
Yeah, go over it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're probably familiar with gender-based language and how that, one of the things I say is our language affects our thinking and our thinking affects our language. The words we use affect the way we think, the way we present ourselves in the world, and the way we think reflects and affects the words that we use. So we are verbal creatures in the sense of word, verb meaning word, not spoken language. We need language in order to bring order to our world, in order to comprehend it. And one of the issues that is really being brought up these days is the issue of gender-based language. And you see this particularly in religion. And we have some people coming on in just a moment. And I apologize for not noticing you all earlier. So the language of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all three monotheistic religions is very much male dominated. We talk about God as Father. We talk about God as Son. The Holy Spirit is conceived of as male. And that affects the way we think about God, and it affects the way we think about ourselves as human beings and hierarchy.
Mm.
So men are higher on the hierarchy than women because God said so, right? So it must be so. So we see in these controversies today going on where the Catholic Church still persists in denying ordination to women. Many churches have denied ordination to women for a very, very long time. And it seems that the Catholic Church is one of the last bastions, at least in the West, of male dominance. It's can be very difficult for women to consider themselves as being equal, as deserving equality, when everything says men are dominant. And men being men like to be dominant. What can I say? So we're not very happy about giving up that dominance and can be quite resistant to it. So he talks about the use of male terms in relationship to God and the various ways. First off, he does admit that this is probably misdirected, the whole male dominant issue. But how do we go about addressing that at a practical level? How do we change the way we think about the words we use? And how do we change the words we use to affect the way we think so that we can get a higher level of equality and equity in this world? And he suggests several solutions, but one of the things that he stays away from is changing the words of received liturgical and scriptural language. His recommendation is, let's talk about it in terms of how we study these things, how we think about them, what we do with them, but not change the language itself. So we would not change it. He would recommend not changing it to God, we believe in one God, Father, Mother, Almighty, or something of that nature. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, and does that cover the question fairly well? You feel like you haven't?
No.
Did I hear someone say no?
I'm trying.
Okay. I think I'm getting background.
This, just a question.
Uh-huh.
A little word is coming to my mind, and it's coming from 50 years ago in college. I think it was Carl Jung who believed there was a female component to God, and that was Shekinah. Am I correct?
Yes, yeah, yes. It's pronounced differently, can also be pronounced Shekinah, but
Okay,
yes, which is
okay. But we don't want to get into that. We won't get
yeah,
into that.
translated into the glory of God.
Okay.
So when it speaks of the glory of God in the Old Testament, the word there is usually is Shekinah.
Okay.
Jeremy, one thing,
Yes.
to go back, if we could, just to the very beginning. The obviously the creed starts, we believe. And the author of our text makes an interesting, I think, comment on that the word, and I'll defer to Bill on this, pistoiamen, we believe, in Greek, does mean we believe, but the Greek is a kind of a positive word in that in Greek, it also means we trust in, or we have faith in. So I think the creed really starts on a kind of positive, favorable note rather than neutral. Believe is fine, but to have faith in and to have trust in is quite really positive. It starts on a great note.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed, and there, I think that Mr. Johnson kind of bases his entire text on that concept that when we say we believe, we are not talking about, I'm going to use another word, epistemological thinking. Epistemology is the study of knowing. How do we know? This is not about knowing. This is about believing. So you're exactly right, Ed. It's we believe, and with all of the things that belief connotes in that word, it's a rich word.
Is
But
it more of an active? I mean, that's what I got from what Ed was saying, that I belief in one sense is sort of stagnant. That's not the right word, but
Neutral.
yeah. And that the belief that you were talking about, Ed, is something that absorbs our being, that is living, or
Yes, but to me, I mean, the Greek word for faith is related to the same word that we're using here. And again, I'll defer to Bill on this, but it really starts on a positive note, not a neutral note.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely so.
Is there any other English word that would fit that construct?
There are probably a lot of them.
Which this prayer, is it written in King James? Is that when it was translated, or?
I'm not sure when the translation we use was done. It's not Jacobean.
Okay.
There's no Jacobean language in it.
Okay. Yeah, I figured it was modernized, but I just wondered when it came to be in its current form.
I mean, it really is. It comes from Greek and then into the Latin, because very few people in this world speak Greek, other than people who are Greek, and certainly not Koine Greek. we tend to hear the Latin more often because the Latin is what you're going to hear in a mass as a singer when we sing a mass, whatever kind, whether it's a requiem mass or any other type of mass, the credo is always part of it. And that's the Latin, and it's important to note that in the mass, credo is I believe, not we believe.
Ah,
So, but the we believe says we as a body are affirming this. To use we instead of I, you can use either, but we brings a sense of community and corporateness to the statement of belief, that as a community we believe these things.
Jeremy, it's Rick. I wanted, that was one of my questions, because in the Book of Common Prayer in Rite 1, although it's really fallen out of common usage now, is I believe. And, you know, it's even churches that seem to use Rite 1 seem to have tended towards saying we believe. It's the I believe seems to have disappeared. But I don't know what the significance of that is.
It really is a matter of that we recite it in services as a body, as the body of Christ. But if, for instance, you are being baptized or renewing your baptismal vows, it's I believe, because now you're professing this as an individual, or confessing it as an individual. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That does, yes. Thanks. Yes.
I'd like to intervene for just a minute here, though, because I find the difficulty here is all in the word believe. Because believe in modern English implies we don't really know. I'm hesitant to do it. I can even be a huge doubter. And as a footnote to that, to introduce gender in the whole discussion strikes me as wrong at the time. The ancients certainly didn't take the first declension as masculine and the second as feminine and so on. They took them as declensions. Words had endings. And it's a very modern thing, I think, to think of this as all some matter of gender. It didn't really, stop there. And just to be really fun on the thing, the word for knowledge in Greek is feminine, which seems to me to be a reason to get away from worrying about gender. It's only uptight people today who are, in my view, worried about gender. But there we are.
Okay, well, your comments are very well taken. It's quite true. I mean, I often say when people talk about people's gender, I say nouns have gender, people do not. They have sex. But we've lost that because we won't even go there. So, but the issue, I think, Bill, is that people have used that language. Men, I will say, have used the male terms, even though it's simply their nouns and declensions of nouns, to enforce privilege. That obviously God is Father, therefore Father is superior. And men being men have done that for forever. But I do want to move on ahead, because that we could have an entire study on the use of language and gender in language. So to come back, we talk about the oneness of God, and that God is an entity. It's radical monotheism, and this raises issues for some people who have questions, and all of these things tie together. and it ties into the theodicy, which is a term that he introduces, or he doesn't introduce, he brings into the conversation. Theodicy, as Mary Frances indicated a couple of weeks ago, is the theology of God's justice. And the question that theodicy raises, if we say that God is almighty, omnipotent, and we have all these omni words in relationship to God, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, that God has all these capacities. Why is there evil in the world? And this is a very, very challenging question. In seminary, I took a course on theodicy. There's an entire course taught on theodicy, and that didn't cover it. It's like an introduction to the study. It is a very difficult, perplexing problem. And so we're essentially left with a question of how we see the beauty of the earth, we see love, we see caring and compassion, and over against that, we see people doing evil. We see evil things happening. We see people, and in this day and age, it's never stopped. All these things go on. How does that happen? If God created all that is, where did evil come from? And I think Mr. Johnson doesn't do the question justice. He kind of accedes to the idea that this is a very big topic, not something that he fully understands, because I think it's incomprehensible. But one of the things where I think he errs a little bit is he talks about evil being the product of free will. And I'm sitting there going, and what about natural disasters? You have a tsunami and tens of thousands of people are killed. I don't think we can ignore that and say, well, it's evil is because of free will. So these are questions to grapple with. And trust me, we will not answer that question today. But it addresses the issue that Marcion brought to the church and presented to the church in the form of a heresy, which is to say there are two gods. One created the world, one created the world of spirit and light and goodness and love. And we have an evil God, the God of the Old Testament. We have a good God, the God of the New Testament and the God of Jesus. And the creed says, no, we have one God. That God created all that is, seen and unseen. That God created everything. One God, not two gods. So what we're left with is, as Mr. Johnson says, a mystery, which is very difficult. And I think this kind of comes back to what Bill was asking about belief as opposed to knowledge. And I think that it's very challenging to, one can know something here, but this issue presents some very difficult issues with knowing something here. And I think what we need to think about is, how do we say that we know God? Do we know God here Or do we know God here? And if we say we know God here, we need to be very, very careful. Because when we say we know something, another term we use is comprehend. Right? Yeah, I comprehend algebra.
Oh, you don't say that. Come on.
I wondered if I'd get anything on that. How about trigonometry? I can't even spell trigonometry. To say we comprehend something is to say, I can put my arms around it, I can define it. How does it strike you to say, I can comprehend God? Discuss.
I think it's very limiting for God.
We cannot fully comprehend God. And that's been stated, by, I'm sure, theologians. It's probably stated in the Bible. Maybe God himself has said that humans certainly cannot fully comprehend God. Maybe in part.
That surpasses all understanding.
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
this-
mean, we
Go ahead.
can't even comprehend how black holes exist in our universe. I mean, there's so many things we do not know. It just seems so limiting.
Just the act of trying to, I was going to say, symbolically or artistically depict God as always an issue, isn't it? I mean, for some, I came from an Orthodox Presbyterian background. That sheer act, it's like kind of like the Islamic thing. That's idolatry. That's horrible. And then you just look at how artists have struggled with it. And I don't know if anybody's watched any of Henry Louis Gates's The Black Church.
Mhm.
Yes.
The whole concept in the 70s, when some suggested that God be depicted as black, just like blew people's minds, including people in the black church, even though they said, but we're made in his image. So how do we account for us then when everybody else has, as Neil would say, the Swedish Jesus, like the one in the window over the altar at All Saints? It is incomprehensible. It has to be all things at once and then something we can't possibly understand at the same time. There's this cognitive dissonance that you can't get around.
Meg.
Could I just introduce a historical point here? But this controversy in the church was very much alive in the 2nd century AD, 2 centuries before the Creed was finally solved. And people were running around calling each other heretics and things like that. And I think one has to realize that Christianity is an evolving religion. It came out of Judaism as a heresy. Heresy originally meant sect. And Christianity was in my view, originally a sect of Judaism, which sooner or later decided to mark itself off from Judaism in a big way. Well, and also in the 2nd century, along with this problem of knowing, the church was very much attacked as too intellectual. And peripatetic philosophy, Aristotle and Theophrastus, were ridiculed for having developed formal logic. Now that seems incredible, but formal logic was becoming a way to challenge religion, and with some reasonableness to this challenge, because what they call hypothetical syllogism, if-then arguments, are useful when you can't see or touch or anything else. And the church wanted to say, we know, and the philosophers were saying, but you need to be able to demonstrate that. And the word Theophrastus, Aristotle's favorite pupil who developed hypothesis, actually became a word of abuse thrown by Christians at people who were studying geometry, which is, of course, a very logical and important language for human beings. So I don't want to go on with this, but just to say that all of these problems are new. I mean, I think that the church lost it in the 2nd century when they decided to say that people who do hypothetical logic are all heretics and should shut up. Truth comes from above was the slogan. No, but truth comes from above was the slogan of the 2nd century people. And in many ways, it was also a fight between Rome and Greece. Roman Empire was established, but the intellectuals were still Greeks.
Yep.
And that didn't sit very well with the church that was trying to establish itself, take command, sitting in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very, very complicated issue. And if you bring clarity to it, I shall be thrilled and be here daily. But I do just want to say that the whole idea of trying to prove something and was very worrisome. And I think it's important. I mean, if then arguments, if there was lightning, there will be thunder. That's true. But we didn't hear any thunder, so there wasn't lightning. You must have been just imagining. Now, that's a good argument. And the early church didn't like that at all, because the unseen invites hypothetical arguments. But I didn't see lightning. Well, if there was lightning, there must have been thunder. But there wasn't any thunder, therefore you're wrong. And that was thrown at the church. And we'll stop there. All I can tell you is they called people they didn't like peripatetics and students of Theophrastus, and that's ridiculous.
Okay, so you're absolutely right, and we're not in the least suggesting that these are new issues. That's with last week, and we do have the recording available. I was going into what was going on at the time that brought about the creed, which includes many of these things that Bill is referring to. So this is a continuing problem. Maybe one day we'll do a history of the Christian church. And what you see is many of the things that we struggle with today have been extant since day one. You see the controversies arising in the New Testament because we're all human beings and we all perceive the world in our own way. And to try to convince other people that there is truth in this matter, there's a difference for some in between truth and fact. And this is something that we struggle with today. We have people with alternative facts. It's like boggles the brain. But each of us perceives, and this is part of my work as a psychotherapist, we perceive the world in our own way. We cannot perceive it the way other people perceive it. We can use words to try to define that we can agree upon. Yes, I agree with those words, but those words are going to mean possibly different things. I can say cat, and I may be envisioning a tiger, and you may be envisioning stuffed cat on your couch. We're both right, but we have very different ideas. So we need to be in conversation. I think that's the outfall of this, is this ongoing conversation, and the idea that somehow at some point everything is fixed and solid and we know what we're talking about and we can all agree on it, is kind of maybe a little misplaced. That maybe we need to understand that there is dialogue and what is called dialectic, is back and forth, this point of view and that point of view, and they talk to one another and come to some sort of an agreement, and then move to the next stage where we begin to talk about the next things. So it's a moving target, which is part of the fun, frankly, because there's always something to talk about. Let's face it, if we comprehended God, God would not be God.
So Jeremy, when we recite the creed, what should be our, oh gee, I don't know what the word is. How should we approach that? Because we're kind of back to the we believe.
Mm-hmm.
So is what you're saying that each person, in a way, its beliefs are separate. It may be a we, but it isn't as much of a coming together as I thought it might be. No? Or am I just really off the track?
No, you're on target there. It becomes a matter of there are certain concepts, and I'm using that in a very almost in the sense of a Venn diagram. Are you all familiar with Venn diagrams? So let me explain a Venn diagram. A Venn diagram is something it's used in a lot of fields where you say, okay, this is this set of information. Let's say this is this person's perception of an event, and this is this person's perception of an event. You have envision 3 circles, and this is the third party's in conception of an event. Is Penny, are you showing a Venn diagram? There's a Venn diagram. Thank you. So it's where those things overlap that we can say, okay, this is reliable. And this is something that we can use. And I'm doing a very, very high level description of this, but it's the overlapping of each of our ideas about what we're saying when we say that creed. So it becomes, if you recall, he talked earlier in last week, we talked last week about it being inclusive and also exclusive. If you remember that the creed is not only inclusive, which is to say this is what we believe, but it's also exclusive. So if I say I can't believe that, then I can't say that I believe that creed. Does that make sense? So there are those, for instance, who will say, well, for instance, Marcion, we won't go to contemporary world. Marcion would not have said, creator of all, the creator of all seen and unseen, creator of earth and heaven, and all that is seen and unseen. Marcion would not say that because he believed in 2 gods. So that formulation excludes Marcion and his followers. The people who say, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen, they may not agree on all of the nuances of that, but they say, yeah, this I will adhere to. Does that make sense?
To me, it really does, given Bill's comments, because what they're trying to do, I think, is to stake out their territory is not the right word, but to stake out their position. And I mean, let's face it, the Greeks were superb in logic. And I mean, as Bill said, we still use those concepts today. So if you're in an intellectual, I don't know what, consternation, right? I mean, it really sounds like there were a lot of people with a lot of different ideas and everybody saying maybe they were right. This is a way to kind of carve out the space they wanted to carve out to establish, I'm not sure where they're going with it, but maybe to quiet the members that were this way and that way, and to try to bring everyone together so that they had a corporate body. I mean, as a church, they would be much less powerful, if I could say it that way, if they had a whole bunch of believers. But, you know, it depended on who you talked to, what they believed in or didn't. I mean, that really isn't a corporate body of believers. That's a bunch of people just sort of spouting off their own ideas.
Right.
So this was an attempt to bring people together, I hope, under one tent, like we say today, to try to establish that footing and perhaps chart a path through what sounds like a very dangerous minefield of existing philosophy and beliefs that were in the ancient world.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's important to bear in mind, as we were talking about, that not only is the creed inclusive, but it's also exclusive. So if you were to sit and talk with each one of us here as individuals and say, well, what does that mean to you? We might have rather different ideas about what each of those phrases means. But as a body, we can say, yes, I will adhere to this particular point of view, that there is one God. Now, when we get to the Trinity, trust me, it will boggle your mind. It boggles the mind of theologians who study it. It's a challenging concept. And so what we're left with is the word that Johnson uses, which is mystery. There are things we simply cannot comprehend because we are human beings. And I want to bring in, I think it's important to bring in the idea of, and we've been alluding to this, that as human beings, when we speak of the divine, we are speaking in terms of metaphor. So when I use the word metaphor, are you going, what does that mean? Or got it? Or so metaphor is a way of speaking of something in language where it approximates and kind of describes what it is we're talking about, but we understand that we do not fully comprehend it. So when let's use the metaphor, for instance, of a sunset.
Sunset, a metaphor.
Sunset. We'll talk about this, the sun was, or the sky was painted in orange and yellow and deep blues and purples, and we'll use the word painted. Well, obviously no one stood up there with a brush painting the sky. We're describing an astronomical and meteorological effect using language that really has nothing to do with that. But we're describing something that with unscientific language in a way that makes it apparent to others. So when we talk about God, we are necessarily using metaphor. because we concede we cannot possibly describe God. If we could describe God, then God would not be God. Right?
That's too cute. That's too cute. You can't get away with that.
Okay. So we must accept that anything we say about God is going to be metaphorical. Which should give us pause about saying, well, what I believe is about God is true, and what you believe about God is false. Now,
Yeah.
trust me, I don't mean to be flip about that. We need to engage in serious theological inquiry and discussion, but we also need to be very careful about what we do with that information. So, for instance, and again, I'll refer to church history, people have been burned at the stake, have been subjected to horrible death and torture over points of theology that you go, what?
Yeah.
Because they said this was true and this was not. And when you read about these controversies, you go, really? People died or people were killed over that?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
May I just reinforce a point
Sure.
that I believe in anyway? That
Okay.
we should all abandon the word heretic. I had a wonderful experience in a coffee hour at All Saints Church when the conversation was terminated by the person with whom I speak. He called me a heretic and walked away.
Oh, geez.
And this, but the point is there's so many things out there that makes it very hard to understand and believe. And the church did start as a heresy, which in
Yep.
Greek, heresy in Greek simply means a sect, a separate.
Mm-hmm.
So the Presbyterians are heretics, and so are the Baptists, and because they have certain different beliefs.
Right.
So we got to loosen up and say, hey, we know very little, but we all believe a great many things.
Right. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And the only reason I use the word heretic is because it's the language that was used at the time. That certain things were described as heresies. I don't care about it myself. It's like, okay,
I'm not
they have a
sure when
different
the
point of
word
view.
heresy got that meaning, by the way. I'm going to shut up. I'll go up and brush my teeth.
Oh, no, don't do that.
But heresy in the 2nd century AD was, in my view, a positive word applied to the Christian church in formation. It was still a heresy of Judaism. And what the Christian church is going to look like in 100, 200, 300 years may be very different than what it is today.
Absolutely, I'm sure it will. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't ascribe to describing anyone as a heretic. I only use it in the historical context.
Okay.
That the church or somebody described, and they were all busy, particularly during the medieval period and into the Renaissance and the Reformation. I mean, they were so busy describing other people as heretics. It was like you read the history of the Episcopal Church and the Reformation in England. It's like, oh my God, whoever was on the throne was burning and beheading the other side, and it went back and forth. And then we get into Commonwealth, and that had its own thing.
So that's an interesting point about this creed. On the one hand, it may have had a benign purpose of drawing people together, of helping to calm the waters of argument and worse, right? And then it's so true of so many things in life, especially things that are written and have powerful influences. It was used as a weapon.
Yes.
So it I mean, it's really sad. It's not that I didn't know all about the horrible things that happened under Bloody Mary, for example. The it's both beautiful and extremely dangerous, I guess I would say.
Yes, as that because we're human beings, and human beings are wont to do these things. I want to say we're almost out of time. I want to say that Mr. Johnson makes a couple of references you may recall about, or he has a discussion about liberation theology and process theology. His process theology is a fairly decent analysis of it. His liberation theology discussion, I think, is off base. First off, and when I read it, I was like, what? He said it originated in East Germany, which to me was a little gratuitous. Liberation theology came out of South America, post-Vatican II, and basically says God identifies with the oppressed in this world, and it seeks to blend socioeconomic justice with theology, which, interestingly enough, if you read the story of Jesus and his ministry, there's a whole lot to be said for that. So, and to my knowledge, liberation theology has nothing to say about the nature of God. I don't believe there's a thoroughgoing theology of the nature of God coming out of liberation theology. Essentially, liberation theology is saying we need to be at work in the world trying to relieve oppression and bring about social justice and equity in this world. So I wasn't quite sure why he brought that in. Process theology is more on point, because process theology does say that God is evolving and changing, and that brings in another theological point of view, with vis-a-vis Almighty. Can the Almighty change? And yet the Old Testament, there's discussion in various parts about how God changed his mind, or God changed God's mind. So another theological question. So we're going to need to leave it at that. I hope you can appreciate that this course may answer some questions, but if it doesn't raise a whole lot more questions, then I'm not doing my job. Because that's what theology is all about, is raising questions, answering questions, raising questions, answering questions. It's an ongoing enterprise. All righty. Any
Yes.
questions or?
No.
All right. We will see you all here next week, and see you in church. If you have any
Thanks.
questions, feel free to send me an email.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
You will.
Jeremy.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.